proceed. Thank you. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to welcome all of you present to this hearing of our Joint Select Committee on National Security, pursuant to this committee's inquiry into the management of the processes regarding the procurement, registration, retrieval, and storage of firearms, as well as forensic ballistic practices in Trinidad and Tobago. I might indicate that this hearing is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Might I particularly welcome Mr. Stephen Williams, Acting Commissioner of Police, as well Ms. Arlette Lewis, the Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center, and both your accompanying officials, as I invite you, Commissioner, for the benefit of the listening and viewing public, to introduce yourself and cause your colleagues to so do, and then Madam Arlette Lewis and those officers who accompany her from the Forensic Science Center. Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the Joint Select Committee. I am Stephen Williams. I'm the Acting Commissioner of Police for Trinidad and Tobago, and I have accompanying me 3 officers of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I would ask each one to identify themselves.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. I am Senior Superintendent Leroy Brebno, and I am the police armorer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Acting Assistant Superintendent Coffey from the Firearms section.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and other members of the committee. I am Sergeant Ford, and I'm attached to the Specialist Evidence Recovery Unit, CERU.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Arlette Lewis. I am the Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center, Ministry of National Security. I will allow my fellow members of staff to introduce themselves.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Glenn Parmuso. I'm the Deputy Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Paul Brown, Scientific Officer 1 at the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Shervan Wilson. I'm a Scientific Officer 1 attached to the Firearm section of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kenneth Superville, and I'm an IBIS technician.
Thank you very much. Of this Joint Select Committee, and let me continue on my right, beginning with Senator Coppin.
Michael Coppin, member.
Faris Alrawi, member.
Paul Richards, member.
Nigel De Freitas, member.
Nicole Olivier, member.
And the other persons, thank you all very much. The other persons you see present at the desk here with me are the very able support staff of this committee, led by, of course, the committee's secretary, Madam Jackie Sampson Miguel, who is at the same time clerk of the House and doubles and triples and quadruples in this capacity across the board. And of course, Mr. Caesar, who is the clerk of the Senate, and the very hard-working Assistant Secretary, Mr. Johnson Greenidge, who made a boast a while ago, but we'll treat with that later. Let me outline, ladies and gentlemen, the objectives of this inquiry. I should read them for your benefit. 1, to ascertain whether there is a strict adherence to the rules and procedures in relation to the procurement, registration, retrieval, and storage of firearms. 2, to identify whether there are weaknesses in the implementation of the processes regarding the procurement, registration, retrieval, and storage of firearms, and what can be done to improve or correct these weaknesses as we might identify them. 3, to determine whether there is strict adherence to the existing policies and procedures in relation to the forensic ballistic testing of firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. 4, to identify whether there are weaknesses in the implementation of policies with respect to the forensic ballistic testing of firearms and what can be done to improve them. 5, to gain an understanding of the targets and strategies of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service towards the elimination of illegal and unauthorized firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. 6, to gain an understanding of the working relationships that subsists and exists between the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and other agencies, if any, involved in matters related to ballistic testing of firearms. 7, to make appropriate recommendations to the Parliament, of which we are but a subset, a committee, where necessary. Let me from the outset state to you, Mr. Commissioner, and to you, Madam Lewis, that if upon presentation of any interrogation or question from this committee, you consider that you do not have the information immediately to hand or accurate information in response to a question put, or any sensitive issue that you might rather communicate to us other than in this particular medium, we invite you to say so, and you will be called upon, in fact, you will be expected to put the answers in writing and forward them with promptitude to this committee thereafter. All the proceedings here today are being recorded, and therefore we are to be mindful of that fact. I would therefore like to begin our interrogation of these issues as I invite Senator De Freitas to begin on our behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to everyone. I just want to begin by asking, for the benefit of the public and for yourselves, a few introductory questions. There are 7 in total, and for ease of logistics, I will ask 4 at first, and then after you answer those 4, I will ask the other 3. The first question is, what is meant by the term firearm? Second question is, can anyone apply for a firearm license in Trinidad and Tobago? And what kind of firearm may be licensed? The third, how does the police decide if a person is fit to own a firearm? And the fourth, from the first batch of questions, is how are firearms to be stored?
Wait. With your permission, Chairman, if we can just get a repeat, fairly quick piece.
Sure. What I will do, probably, with your approval, Mr. Chairman, is probably ask them one by one. That might be easier. The first question is, what is meant by the term firearm?
Well, I would just want to go strict with the law because it is defined in the law under the Firearm Act. Firearm means any leader barrel weapon from which ammunition can be discharged, or any prohibited weapon, and includes any component part of any such weapon and any accessory to any such weapon designed or adapted to diminish the noise or flash caused by firing the weapon, but does not include any air rifle, air gun, or air pistol of a type prescribed by order made by the President and of a caliber so prescribed. And when we speak about the air rifle and the prescribed caliber, .177 is, at this point in time, the prescribed smooth bore.
Thank you. I'll move on to the second question. Okay. Could I also ask for you to define what ammunition is and what prohibited weapon is?
Well, just to indicate, the definition for ammunition is pretty long, but again, it's provided for in the Firearm Act, Chapter 1601. And I may start, so you can stop me if you find it's too long, but I can start by saying ammunition means A, ammunition for any firearm of any kind. B, every shell, cartridge case, bomb, hand grenade, bullet, or like missile, whether containing any explosive or gas or chemical or not, and whether intended to be discharged from or by any gun or other propelling or releasing instrument or mechanism or not, except missiles which can be used only for the purpose of extinguishing fires. C, every part of any such shell, cartridge case, bomb, hand grenade, bullet or missile, whether such shell, cartridge case, bomb, hand grenade, bullet or missile may have been completely formed at any time or not. D, every fuse, percussion cap, or priming cap adapted or prepared for the purpose of causing the propulsion of or exploding any shell, bomb, hand grenade, bullet, or other projectile. E, every bullet, clip, or cartridge clip. F, any explosive when enclosed in any case or contrivance adapted or prepared so as to form a cartridge, charge, or complete round for any firearm or any other weapon, or to form any tube for firing explosive, or to form a detonator or a projectile which can be used whether singly or in suitable combinations as or in connection with a missile. G, everything declared by order of the President to be ammunition. So extremely long, extensive definition.
I appreciate that, Commissioner, because members of the public listening to you here today may not have been aware of some of those things, and there are many parents out there who would like to advise their young. So we very much welcome this. And what do we mean by a prohibited weapon?
Prohibited weapon is also defined by the Firearm Act, Chapter 1601. Prohibited weapon means any artillery or automatic firearm, B, any grenade, bomb, or other like missile, or any weapon of whatever description or design which is adapted for the discharge of any noxious liquid, gas, or other thing.
Does that include, that definition, tear gas gun?
If they?
Does that definition include tear gas guns?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Just, would that also include pepper sprays or mace?
Yes. 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 C tells us any weapon of whatever description or design which is adapted for the discharge of any noxious liquid, gas, or other thing.
Yes.
So for the time being, those matters are in breach of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah? Now, I would like to, for the benefit of the public, across the United States and sometimes in Trinidad, you see replica firearms. The thing looks like the real McCoy, but it may not be capable of discharging a projectile and therefore may not strictly match the definition that we have just read. How does the law, how does the police and the law treat with a replica firearm?
Senior Superintendent Leroy Brebno.
Yes, sir.
As it said, replica, and how it is designed and constructed,
yes,
it would not be able to discharge with lethal force any missile or any other thing like that. So it's constructed and designed just as a firearm would look or appear, but it would not have the mechanism that would allow it to fall under the Firearm Act.
And of course, these things could be used to perpetrate robberies and so on.
Well,
and they
yes.
could scare the life out of a citizen if one is presented.
The thing about it, so yes, it is. It will, because the average citizen wouldn't know whether you are pointing a real firearm or imitation firearm at them. The mere fact that they see gun, they would respond to that.
In which case, before I give way to Senator De Freitas again, in which way, if that is used in a robbery and it becomes part of the evidence, you'll charge for an aggravated robbery because you put the person in a certain state,
yes,
in order to do that?
It would be referred to as imitation firearm,
yes,
and the evidence would so lead to that you would.
And of course, as police officers, notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't match the definition, I'm sure that you will agree with this committee if we say parents should advise their children that possession of these could create the wrong impression. And a law enforcement officer can reasonably think that it is the real thing from a distance, and the results could be catastrophic.
Yeah, that is also a possibility, but then you would have a lot of persons in Trinidad and Tobago who would go abroad and they would purchase these things just as ornament for their homes, or as the case may be. The law doesn't really say that they can't own it as such.
Yes. So from your practical standpoint, again, do you think that, I mean, because if I show up here with a lighter, it looks like a gun, and a big one, or a cigarette lighter that is, or I show up with an ashtray in the shape of a shell. I've seen that, a 50-millimeter shell casing used as an ashtray or some such thing. How, in practice, how is this dealt with at the border, and how does the police deal with this?
Well, the thing about
and
this,
finally, do you think that we should amend the laws in order to treat with these developments or circumstances?
But the law provides to a certain extent where you would, in doubt, as a police officer, you can make an arrest for the while. But this is why you have the police armorer, or you would have armorers, because once it's imported into the country, the customs, if in doubt, they are required to seize. And if it falls within the definition of the Firearm Act, then you would prefer charges against these people or persons. If it is not, then it's exempted under the law, and the person would be able to keep such.
To be released and so on.
Yes,
but
sir.
they might have spent a few hours in your care pending your inquiry.
It would have been.
Yes, yes.
As it's required, it's supposed to be seized on importation into the country,
yes,
and sent to the armor for examination. Once it falls within the meaning of the Firearm Act, we could do what we have to do. If it doesn't, then it's not a firearm, we can release it.
We thank you very kindly. Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I just wanted to ask, in regards to licensing of firearms, what criteria is used by the police service in determining the fitness of an individual to own a firearm? And in the event that that person passes on or dies, what happens to that firearm?
Good day, sir. Concerning the firearm user's license, right? Once an individual is interested in obtaining a firearm, he's entitled to proceed to the government printery, where he can collect the forms at a small fee, of course, returns to our office with either a provisional license and an FUL license application, dependent on the individual, whether he's military or civilian, accordingly. He comes to the firearm section with the forms, relevant forms, 2 passport-size pictures. We, in turn, open a file for the individual and send this file to the designated area of the individual, his home address, or the district where he resides. When it goes to the division, it is usually minuted to the senior superintendent in charge of the district. He, in turn, would forward it to an investigator within his division. The investigator will do a comprehensive investigation, and the applicant will be required to submit documents which support his request. On the expiration of the inquiries and the investigation, the file will then be sent back to the Commissioner of Police with recommendations. These recommendations will also contain, as I said before, specific documents to the specific requests. When it returns to the Commissioner of Police, the file will then be sent to his office. He will then make a decision on whether the firearm applicant is granted or not granted. The applicant will then be informed accordingly on the decision of the Commissioner of Police. The second question was that, sir? Where, when you say debt, it could mean applicant or you mean a FUL holder?
The owner of the firearm. Let's say
once an FUL holder is granted a firearm and he dies under whatever circumstances, the area officers will go to, if it's his home, seize the weapons, lodge it in the closest police station, inclusive of the ammunition. A comprehensive report will then be sent to the Commissioner of Police, outlining the facts under which the person died. We will then take the file at the firearm registry. We'll mark off the file accordingly after we ascertain that the death was caused either by natural causes or by other means. We will then, so long as we are satisfied that it was a normal death or under no circumstances that were suspicious in our view, we will then cancel the file and send a message to the station, usually in writing, for them to mark off the relevant records and then return the file to us.
Okay, just 2 more questions.
If I may just add.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just to note that the firearm which is lodged, having seized, it is still the property of the family of the deceased person. So it is not a firearm which then goes as the property of the police. If it's still a property, and then the family can dispose of that property. So if somebody obtains in future an FUL, they can apply to have that firearm be assigned to them, and the family can sell that item to them, and it's now become their firearm.
So just for clarification for the public, so the firearm, after the person passes on and you determine it's by natural causes, is kept within...
And the property keeper.
Right. And if a family member of the person wants to have a firearm license and they apply and they are approved, then they can retrieve that particular firearm, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well,
but they could also sell the firearm to anyone who would have obtained a firearm user's license.
Okay. Now that answers the second question I was going to ask based on the response that you gave. The first one was, In your experience, how long is this process in terms of applying for a firearm and actually getting the license? How long is that process take on average now?
Well, it's a long process because what transpires is that we have thousands of applications by the citizens of this land for firearm, and we have other forms of firearm approvals for which basically take precedent, and I can give you a whole list of those other forms of approvals. So it could be well in excess of a year.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up question through you. Indeed. Good afternoon, panel. And this is just for the clarification of the public, because I know people sometimes misunderstand what they hear. The license to own and use a firearm, because you referenced the fact that if someone dies, the firearm is kept by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, but it's still the property of the family. There's a clear distinction between owning and license to use. Just for the clarification of the public, because people can misunderstand very easily. Well, my family owns it, so, and if the police have not yet retrieved it, if the person dies, because we own it, we may feel erroneously that we have the option to use it. And just clarify that for the public, please.
Yeah, the law is clear. The only person authorized to possess that firearm is the firearm holder. And if the firearm holder is deceased, no other relative is authorized by law to possess that firearm. And it's in those circumstances, once the information reaches the police, police would respond instantly to seize the weapon and take away that difficulty within the environment of the family. So the information reaches, a firearm holder has died, officer goes across, seize the weapon, seize the ammunition, and have it lodged at the police station.
Also for clarity, Mr. Commissioner, any of your team, the law, rules, and regulations regarding the maintenance and modification of firearms, licensed firearms.
You said modification, you said?
Yeah. Well, people may feel that I have a license to own and use, so I can change it in any way, and that may be against the law, and I want the public to understand that.
That's a breach, Senator. That's a breach. Because the law provides that once you alter the firearm or shorten a barrel or anything of the like, you have committed an offense. So you would be subject to be charged for doing anything, any such. So if you bought, it must be in its original state and be maintained in its original state. The only persons that would be permitted to do any altering or any sort of repairs are the licensed gunsmiths in the country or armorers. And those repairs must not be altering the firearm.
In terms of the acquisition of licensed firearms, are these approved by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service?
Yeah. Firearms are within the domain of the Commissioner of Police to approve. Where somebody is refused approval, there is an appellate system, there's a firearm appeal board, and the person can apply to the firearm appeal board for a review of the decision of the commissioner, and then it is the responsibility of the firearm appeal board to make a determination.
Does the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service or the Forensic Sciences Center at this time have an count of the number of privately owned licensed firearms, including handguns, shotguns, rifles in Trinidad and Tobago? Or a record in terms of accountability?
Yeah. Yes, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service does in fact have a record of all licensed firearms.
How often is that audited?
I didn't get the question.
How often is that audited? Is that updated?
Well, it's updated with each approval. So each approval adds to the registry of firearms for Trinidad and Tobago. So each approval adds to it.
Given the fact that the violent crime in the country usually seem to be associated with guns, does the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service have an idea of the number of illicit firearms circulating at any time in the country?
Well, one of the things we can say is that we will not have a correct assessment of the number of firearms circulating in Trinidad and Tobago, but we can give at times estimation, and those estimations are guided by the number of seizures, by the number of incidents that have occurred with the use of firearms, and putting a factor by way of consideration of what is not known. But it will not be truly a correct position. The only correct position you can be guided by is what you would have actually seized.
With that said, can the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service give us a sense of the trends? Is it decreasing? Is it increasing? Has it increased over the last couple of years?
Well, I think we can safely say there is an increased trend taking place, a clear indication by way of our seizures. 2014, we seized 585 firearms.
Could you repeat that, please?
2014, 585 firearms were seized. 2015, it was increased to 691. 2016, it went further up to 765. What we are seeing is a consistency of an increase and a substantial increase. While we know that there is a continued greater effort put into seizing firearms, the issue is still relevant to note that the number of firearms that we are seizing is an indicator of the number of firearms in the country. So as we seize more, there's an indication that there is even more. So I would safely say critical to the country is about finding ways and means of preventing firearms from entering this land. Otherwise, we will have a continuous challenge on our hand, because the police service has actually got to a record high each year. 585 is the highest in the country's history up to 2014. 691 is the highest in the country's history up to 2015. And 765 is the highest in the country's history up to 2016. So each year we are pushing, we are seizing more firearms and taking it to a new height, but it's an indicator of the level of firearms in the country.
Also, in terms of your analysis, would you be able to say if the weapons are increasing in sophistication?
Well, if we look at the recent years, and I would say the span of the last 6 to 7 years, yes, I would say within that period of time, it's obvious that the weapons are increasing in the level of sophistication. But the particular point, I think, would have been missed by us earlier by way of one of the extended part of the question presented by the chairman about the issue around whether we will be recommending some level of amendment to the Firearm Act. And in keeping with the very said question that you have posed, Senator Richards, we have reached the point of sophistication in items which are not classified as firearms, and those are air rifles. If you walk into any one of those shops, and it might be better for me not to call the names of shops, but there are numerous shops selling air rifles, you will be shocked with the level of sophistication of those air rifles. The other issue with air rifle is that, and when I say shock, the shape will challenge you. You will believe that it is definitely not an air rifle. And the next point I'm making is the weapon has the capacity way beyond the traditional, what we call pellet gun. So the air rifles of today are as deadly as firearms, pistols. And it is necessary for us to revisit air rifles in Trinidad and Tobago because those air rifles are now being purchased at a rapid rate. and they're used for hunting and other purposes, and I've been advised, and a rifle will strike down any one of those small animals in the forest, including agouti and everything else.
If I might say, anecdotally, I learned that one resulted in the death of a human being in this country in the past. And more than that, is it the case that the commissioner has to give some kind of approval for the purchase of an air rifle, or is it a free-for-all?
There's a practice, and the practice would have been guided by way of, if you can call, common sense and understanding. All the dealers, firearm dealers, by way of practice, request a letter from the Commissioner of Police. There's no requirement for it by way of the law. So what people do is submit a certificate of character and an application, and then they can go forward by way of a permission letter to acquire an
Let me
air
direct this
rifle.
question before I close to the police armorer, the man who is skilled to examine and to tell us with expertise about firearms. Is it really the case that someone lost his or her life by way of being shot with an air rifle in this country, or did it just become...
I have heard of that, Mr. Chairman, yes. And to add to what the commissioner have been saying, the law, we go back to the definition of firearm.
Yes.
And to the end where the president prescribed the 1.77 smoothbore air rifle. Now, manufacturers have become very crafty because it's business, where you can design a 1.77 air rifle as a Galil rifle, as a AK-47, as whatever, even you want to design it as a 50 caliber, but the end result, it comes into the country as a smoothbore .177. What we need to do and take stock of, we have those air rifles coming into the country with a muzzle velocity of 1,600 feet per second. If you compare that with a 9mm pistol, which fires at a rate of about between 300 to 600 feet per second, what is really changing it? So we must now put something in place where we control, as they do in the Olympics and other places, where you have your muzzle velocity not exceeding 800 feet per second or 600 feet per second. These are the things that we can put in place to help assist. Because, as I said, the design and how they are constructed, once they are within the law specified in the Firearm Act, you have to permit them.
Well, you know, you made reference and you directed our attention to the last sentence or the last elements of the definition of firearm, and I just want to refresh my memory and hours on it. Firearm means any lethal barreled weapon from which ammunition can be discharged, or any prohibited weapon, we heard that from the commissioner a while ago, and includes any component part. So any part of any such weapon is considered a firearm, and any accessory to any such weapon designed or adapted to diminish the noise, like a silencer or flash, caused by firing the weapon. And these are the words you directed to us two, Senior Soup Brebner, but does not include, so firearm does not include any air rifle, air gun, or air pistol of a type prescribed by order made by the president. It means, therefore, that if the president did not prescribe a particular one, then it falls outside of the law. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, because you see, air rifles are from .177 to 30 caliber.
So you, as it now stands, have some concerns about those air rifles.
Yes, I do.
And therefore, one would expect that if you haven't done it already, through your commissioner, through the Minister of National Security for the consideration of the cabinet, maybe the president can be directed to this with a view of changing the way in which he prescribed in the past or will prescribe in the future. We look forward to that, actually.
That is in the preparatory stage at this point in time, Chairman, and that will be made available shortly. We are, in fact, tabulating the data on the present types of air rifle.
Thank you very much. Senator Richards, I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Acting Commissioner, and any other member of your team who thinks they can answer. You indicated in 2014 it went to 585, 2015 illegal guns 691, 2016 765. Is that accurate?
Accurate.
How has the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service responded to this? Because obviously this poses a much greater threat to national safety and certainly your officers on the front line. This increasing threat of illegal guns that are being seized, which means that the criminal element is obviously accessing more and more of these illegal weapons from whatever sources.
Well, I would first indicate that by way of response, we have been focusing on seizing these weapons, and we have launched out numerous approaches, including border patrols, and those border patrols on land in combination with the effort of the Defense Force. So we team up with the Defense Force, and we have increased the levels of border patrol on the land to address the issue of firearms entering. We have targeted persons moving on the street in the public domain through our stop and search effort. And all these have allowed us to seize additional weapons in those years. And we are now focusing in 2017 of going one step further, of emphasizing the issue of timely prosecution of offenders, where we are prioritizing firearm offenders above all other offenders by way of the police focus. We have been establishing criminal case management units across all the divisions, all get towards ensuring that we prepare and be in a position to present our cases in court, those firearm-related matters as a priority.
Relatedly, and this question may be able to be answered by Ms. Lewis, the director of the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Sciences Center. I'm presuming the agencies are working together. Or yourself, Mr. Acting Commissioner, have you been able to ascertain primary origins of these illegal weapons that are coming into the country from any particular jurisdiction or jurisdictions?
In relation to that question, Mr. Richards, via the e-trace system, which is a system managed by the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm, and Explosives, at CIRU, every firearm that is submitted, we would examine it and identify, recover all marks that will allow us to identify the source of the firearm in terms of where it was manufactured.
Could you just state what CIRU is for the record, for the public also information?
CIRU is the Specialist Evidence Recovery Unit of the Homicide Bureau. So the information is identified, captured, and via that system shared with the U.S. authorities, who in turn does the search. And we would be given the information as to the success of the search to identify where firearms may have come from.
Just let me give way to Member Oliveri.
All right.
Sorry, 1 second, please, member. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. At this point in time, I would not be able to give you the information identifying the specific regions that it emanated from, but the information could be supplied at a later date.
Yes.
Thank you. In terms of your strategies to increase your actual success at detecting firearms, are you using things like explosive detection dogs to assist you then when you have your stop and search or at the border patrols? Do you use dogs to assist you in finding the weapons if they are concealed on the persons or within the premises?
Yes, we do utilize our canine, and they have supported us well. We have been able to discover locations of firearms where the normal human being hasn't been able to so detect. The canine assists us with that. So we have been utilizing the canine as a key component in our effort.
Let me venture again some anecdotal or folklore on this question of firearms. In Trinidad and Tobago today, there is a real perception, a powerful perception, that every little boy out there, and in some cases girls, have a gun, and they could get access pretty easily. Now, I've been hearing of the detection over the years 2014, 15, 16. This is fine. But if we retrieve 750 firearms in 2016 and feel happy about it, and the folklore I just told you is real, like every other little boy out there, because the way that we read about shooting incidents, it does appear to us that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these illegal weapons out there. So is there at all any idea, any figure? Because if we see 745, what was the figure in? 765. And in fact, there are 20,000 illegal firearms as of today. There's nothing to really jump about. So, and I know, I understand the constraints that our research shows that there's no country in the world that can evenly or accurately measure the number of illegal firearms. So we understand that. But does the police have any idea, any figure with which it works, so that if I get 761 or 65, sorry, I could feel, yes, I'm making a serious impact, or am I just shooting in the dark? If I may be permitted that ugly metaphor.
While we operate on the premise that what we are seizing is around half of what is in the country, we have no way of truly justifying that. What is obvious to us is that from, if we want to call it the known, every day that we have an incident involving a firearm is a factor to be considered as an additional firearm being out there. And we don't celebrate, because we haven't been celebrating the number of firearms seized. We only will celebrate the number of firearms seized when we see the number of firearms seized reflected in a clear drop in the number of firearm incidents, especially the murders. So the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has been celebrating it, but I presented. Okay. Yeah.
I celebrate because I know it could pose danger to every single one of us. So I know you don't celebrate, but I do.
Yeah. So we continue the effort, but it goes beyond the police service. We have the other agencies to provide support, and that's where it's relevant as it relates to what we refer to as border control. Those borders are maritime, also by way of the ports of entry, such as the airport, and we have to look at all the mechanism for tightening in the country the entry of firearms, even by way of the postal services.
Yes. Senator Coppin, I recognize you.
Through you to the Commissioner, I just want to refer you to some questions that were sent to you on February, which you replied to on February the 10th, 2016, and it relates to the centralized database system that may or may not exist for firearms in this country. Could you tell me, does the TTPS maintain a centralized digital or paper-based registry for firearms, legal, registered and unregistered? That's the first question. Secondly, I don't know if you could help me to clear up some of my own doubts, because in the said response you spoke to there being an inventory of firearms being maintained per division. So I don't know if there is an inconsistency that needs to be clarified, or there was just some error in reporting in your response. Could you tell me about that?
We have records in all the divisions, and firearms are effectively licensed. Each firearm holder licensed their weapon in a division at a police station. So we have records at those locations, but we have a central location at headquarters. Police Admin Building is the correct reference, where there is a firearm registry for which acting ASP Coffee, the officer there, is actually in charge of managing. So we do in fact have a centralized registry for all weapons in the country.
Well, perhaps, City Speaker.
I was just speaking, firstly, that registry is about licensed firearms. Unlicensed firearms, the records we have are those which come into our custody by way of seizures. So we don't have records of what is in circulation, which is not under our control.
So could you assist us by, in the said response, you spoke about there being an that there's an investigation of loss of missing firearms and ammunition, that the PTPS is guided by Standing Order 41, number 17, which is, and you attach it for ease of reference. And that section 17 spoke about how the police is supposed to go about finding out about lost firearms. But when I looked at the actual regulation, it didn't actually prescribe how any proactive mechanism whereby the police goes out or to trying to ascertain whether or not firearms were lost or stolen. Could you indicate to us, is there any spot checks, any annual or biannually or monthly spot checks, or is it only the responsibility of the firearms user to report stolen or lost firearm?
Well, it's twofold. The firearm user has an obligation in law to so report, so he has an obligation in law. But the police service also has a responsibility for monitoring those firearms out there. So each station commander has the responsibility of monitoring in his station command the firearms which are assigned. Each station has a firearm register identifying all the firearm holders in that jurisdiction, for which it is his responsibility for monitoring. If I take the question one step further, whether all the station commanders are monitoring on a monthly, quarterly, or a set system, I would say there is no set system for those station commanders to monitor. But I do in fact know that there are station commanders who do in fact visit firearm holders and do in fact check. To say that it's done every month or every quarter, I'm not in a position to so state.
But that is not pursuant to any particular section of the law. Surely there seems to be a lacuna in the law, because there's no obligation on the police to go out and do any spot checks or any routine checks of firearms, is there?
Well, I can just verify, because to the best of my knowledge, there has been directive assigned to officers to so do. So I can just verify that in answering that. But if we look at the law, the substantive law, I would say no, not in the substantive law.
So that is something that you would suggest, maybe an amendment you would like to see it put forward? Because there is a prevailing view amongst persons that guns are supposed to be registered in the possession of licensed users, but they are on the streets, and there's no real way, I think, looking at the law, for us to tell. The obligation is on the firearms user to make a report within 24 hours. But if he doesn't, then what? How do we know? How does the police know whether or not the guns that are supposed to be in the possession of these individuals are in fact in the possession of these individuals?
Well, I'm happy that you raise it, and that's why it comes right back to the importance of the responsibility as it relates to managing the issue of firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. Firearms should not be handed out in an irresponsible manner across Trinidad and Tobago. It should be a responsible thing to do, and that's why you have to take stringent measures in pursuing the issuing of firearm users license. And critical to that, responsible people who are out there as firearm holders must hold dear to their obligation of reporting the loss of firearms in accordance with the law. So it is about that obligation in the law for persons to so do, and the circumstances under which it would have been lost or stolen. They have that legal obligation. And second to that, by way of the police service, we have a general responsibility of monitoring, but it is not prescribed in the law to say monitor by weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis.
When I look at the law, it says that the penalty for not reporting is $7,500. Do you think that that is sufficient? I mean, for me, I think the persons have incentive to perhaps lend out a gun, lose it, and not report it. In fact, in both Section 28(1), there is two offenses. One, when he fails to report within 24 hours, and then another one if it's lost via negligence or true negligence. So the fine doesn't seem to be very persuasive, I would say. In fact, it seems to create an incentive for persons to breach the law. Would you agree that $7,500 is not a sufficient fine for such an offense?
Well, I would say I do not focus on the prescribing of the fine. That is where the legislators come into being. What I would say is that critical for me is ensuring that I enforce the law. So that somebody lost a firearm, we seek out the circumstances, investigate it, prosecute them. So that fine, I'm leaving it up to the legislators to view.
Quick question, another question.
Senator, comment just before you go on. Acting Commissioner, has that been an issue you seem concerned about, that responsibility aspect? Have your records shown people not reporting lost firearms or registered firearms turning up as weapons as the weapon in criminal activity? Is that an issue?
I would share with you that we have had some detection, but we have not have it as a substantive major problem. But we have had some detection, which actually adds to the concern.
Would those be state-issued firearms or privately licensed firearms?
Privately licensed firearms.
I'm glad that Senator Richards raised that point, because in your response February 10th, you asked what are the required processes to be followed for the procurement of firearms by private security firms and authorized civilians. And the last stage is that on completion of the aforementioned actions, the firearms are recorded at the relevant stations and then taken by the licensee to the Forensic Science Center and test fired. The results are forwarded to the Commissioner of Police for filing, thus completing the process. However, when the exact same question was asked of the TTPS and the Defense Force, that is to say, what are the required processes to be followed for the procurement of firearms for the Defense Force and TTPS. There was no parallel obligation that on completion, the firearms are supposed to be recorded at the relevant stations and taken by the licensee to the Forensic Sciences Center and test fired. Could you tell me why that is? Is there no obligation for your firearms to be taken to the Forensic Sciences Center and test fired? Because there's a prevailing view amongst members of the public that a number of these crimes are committed by the police or police-issued firearms. So could you tell me whether or not there is, in fact, a prevailing obligation on the TTPS to actually take their guns into the Forensic Sciences Complex Center?
I can safely say to you, Senator, that it's a requirement on all the armed forces to have their firearms taken to the Forensic Science Center and be test fired and be entered on the IBIS base. All the, well, I shouldn't say all, the firearms that are presently issued in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, all of those firearms presently issued to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service are in fact and was taken to the Forensic Science Center and have been tested. We got in new firearms, and the testing procedure is not something that you can go and you can do 200 firearms or 300 firearms at once. So we have to make arrangements with the Forensic Science Center on a daily basis, and that process is ongoing. All the firearms belonging to security firms, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the legally owned firearm users who obtain for the FUL, every firearm that is in Trinidad and Tobago at present ought to be tested, and we try to maintain that.
And how many would you say are not yet tested? The police service and the defense force?
I cannot answer for the defense force, but I can safely say, as in the police service, we recently got in 2,500 pieces. Half of them are tested. The remainder that are not tested at present are properly secured and will be taken for testing.
Can you tell me how many there are?
Half of it.
Half of 2,500?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But just to confirm the point that no firearm will be issued because it's issued by the armorer. So no firearm is issued out into the hands of any officer or any station without it first being so tested.
And final question, how many, if any, guns that were registered to the police have been lost in the last 5 years? Could you give me those statistics?
We can obtain these statistics for you.
Okay.
Thank you. On the issue of storage of firearms, is it that from time to time persons who are firearm users, license holders, would they deposit their firearms and ammunition to the TTPS for it to be stored for various reasons? And what's the procedure then that obtains for you storing weapons?
Yes, ma'am. The civilian public would be able to lodge their firearms at the district where there is a station in their district, and they would be allowed to lodge their firearms. Those firearms would be lodged up to a period of time. Like you're going on a short trip, you would be able to lodge it and you go out the country. Once it is in excess of 3 months, we would be recording a statement or to be recorded from the FUL holder as to his reason why he would be lodging his firearm for a period longer than 3 months. And according to that, we take the statement and realize when he would be back, and whenever he is back in the country, his firearm is returned to him. But every FUL holder could lodge their firearms at any station district that they reside in. They would be given, the record would show that they would go into the station, you would hand it into the SDO on duty, and then that SDO would give a receipt, and he is now responsible to hand that over to the property manager of that station. And he is also responsible to have a record of all the relevant information of the firearm and have it lodged. So you have those records, and the person would be given a receipt for having lodged such.
Gain your attention on this one. Commissioner, in respect of firearms held by other armed forces other than the police service, okay, let me put it this way. Is it under the law that the Commissioner of Police has responsibility for registering and monitoring all firearms in Trinidad and Tobago, including those imported by firearm dealers. Is that the case?
Yes, the Commissioner of Police has the responsibility for recording and registering firearms imported by all dealers in the country.
Is the Commissioner of Police today satisfied, comfortable, that the register held by the dealers is as up-to-date as the one held by the police service for licensed firearm holders, as you said a while ago, and that all is reasonably well in that sector?
Well, what I would answer like this to say that it's our intention to improve the system so that we can have an operating system for which the Commissioner of Police can feel satisfied that all dealers are fulfilling their obligations under the law. And we are looking to improve the system of firearm management so that we can have an electronic system available through all the dealers, which will feed back to the police firearm registry. So we are seeking to move to a complete electronic registry system extending out to all firearm dealers. So that's what we are exploring.
Let me ask you a direct question here. Have you, Commissioner, had to deal with ammunition? Yeah, the answer to this is yes, but how regularly? Is it significant, the number of times you've had to deal with ammunition going astray, missing, unaccounted for, between the police service and the defense force and other law enforcement bodies holding firearms? This is of some concern to the public. Ammunition. And I ask that because on one or two occasions, we've had to read and to listen that ammunition issued to law enforcement agencies had been found. Is it something that troubles you regularly, or it's an infrequent experience?
Well, I'm aware of incidents, but I would say at this point in time I can qualify it as infrequent. But even those infrequent incidents trouble me. So all incidents trouble me, even though infrequent. And what we are doing, they say first thing is to address your house, and then you can address every other house. And what we have done within recent times is to ensure that the ammunition that we purchase are specially marked for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service by the manufacturer. So we have moved away from just any ammunition. So if you have a 9mm round, is a 9mm round. Well, today, the ammunition that we are purchasing will reflect a 9mm round with the ascribed insignia of the TTPS. So therefore, if it goes missing and it is found anywhere, it can be clearly distinguished from that of any ammunition out there. No other organization or dealer will have that ammunition. So that's where we are moving.
Is that the same with the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, to your knowledge?
I have heard that they have imported the last set of ammunition similarly.
Does finally, from me on this segment, does the Commissioner of Police, by virtue of the overarching authority under law that you admitted to a moment ago, does the Commissioner of Police have the authority, even in collaboration with your counterpart in the defense force, to go in and have a look at their records, their storage capability, to ensure that you, with the overarching responsibility you just described, feel satisfied that it is being managed as well as the police services?
But the overarching responsibility I described had to do with the firearm dealers, all firearm dealers. I am not too sure that the law is black and white in relation to that overarching responsibility for the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force.
Which brings us to the of ballistic testing, because all of this. But before I go there, some time ago it was reported that I think about 40 firearms went missing from the Forensic Science Center. Just very briefly, what is the latest on that? Were they recovered? What is the status of that?
That matter is still under investigation. It has been through 3 different investigators. Two of the senior officers have since gone on pre-retirement. So it has been through 3 investigators. So it's still being investigated. I have mandated that the investigation be brought to a point of completion so that I can envisage within the next month or 2 that investigation should be completed. But I can furnish to the committee information because I need to verify how much, if any, of the firearms have in fact been recovered. So I'll have to verify that information from the investigator.
And you'll produce that to us in
Yes.
writing. And you see why I asked about this overarching, or overarching, as you said, responsibility. Because if that be the case, I would like to think as a citizen that the Commissioner of Police or one of his delegates should have the authority to go to the Forensic Science Center and to take a look on things to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago don't have to live that experience again. And I think the same with all of the places where legal firearms in the capacity of the Defense Force and others are stored. I think the Commissioner of Police, given the power that you hold under the law, should have the ability, if not personally, but your operatives should be able to go to these places routinely to satisfy you that they are as well managed as they ought to be. Don't you think so, Commissioner?
At this point in time, I see it as added extensive responsibility on the Commissioner, but I agree with you, office holders, and in a particular instance, the Commissioner of Police should be given the authority for managing firearm and controlling firearm across the country. I agree with that.
Mr. Chairman,
thank you very much. I give way to Senator Richards.
2 quick questions, also related to accountability and based on what the chairman had asked earlier on. Commissioner, will you be able to tell us what happens to decommissioned weapons? Because I'm presuming as new weapons come in and weapons become outdated or past their useful point, that some process is involved in dealing with those and accountability for those related to the TNT Defense Force, Coast Guard, police, and also private citizens, and what the accounts are on those in terms of accountability.
Well, the law requires, as it relates to the government firearms I can speak about. Government firearms, once they are what you call deactivated, they would now be placed on something called a board of survey. So you would have the Coast Guard, the prisons, the Defense Force, the police. You are not going to use me as the armorer to deal with the police. So what you would do, you would have a board of survey comprising perhaps 1 member from the Defense Force, member from the Coast Guard, and 2 members from the prison to come and inspect all the firearms that the police have submitted for destruction or decommission. It would be the same thing for all the other services. As it relates to security firms, they...
Take it one step further to the destruction of it. So we look at it and then the destruction and keeping with the UN.
So I'll get to that again. As it relates to security firms, their requirement would be that they would submit a variation when their firearms are malfunctioning, deactivated, because they would have to submit to the Commissioner of Police a variation to replace those that they have that are defective. The procedure entails that they would first lodge all their defective firearms, and they would both give the property manager and send a report to the commissioner of the firearms that they would require to be varied.
I'm glad you brought up the security firms. It was going to be my next question. So the onus is on the security firm to do due diligence and enact the process. Is there some sort of check done to ensure that they are above board? And relatedly to the acting commissioner, there has been quite a bit of concern related to private security firms and their operations in Trinidad and Tobago and their ability to manage their training, vetting processes, and their employees who may or may not be able to use firearms. Is there a concern by the Commissioner of Police or the police service about the operation of those firms as it relates to firearms in Trinidad and Tobago, with concerns expressed in the public domain about a lack of adequate regulation of some of those private security firms and standards?
Just to indicate, the persons in security firms who are authorized to use firearms must all effectively be precepted and have a firearm users employee certificate. And therefore, they have to be taken through a particular process of training in order to be so granted. The concern that we have, and is one which we are at this point in time exploring around, has to do with whether the security firms are effectively ensuring that the persons they put out there with the firearms are persons who are the holders of the FUECs. And that has been raised because of a recent incident or incidents involving some security firms. And in those circumstances, it is a concern for which we are at this point in time devising an approach to effectively address.
When you say some security firm, that's quite nebulous.
Yeah. Well, at this point in time, I would want to so state some security firms, as against stating the names of the security firms. But I can, in fact, highlight to the committee in writing recent incidents.
Just one thing I wanted to inform Mr. Richards about before. All this activity after your border surveys or the lodging of all these things, we are a treaty to the UN lyric. So there is the destruction process after the inspection of all these firearms. So once the Board of Survey records matches what we say we have to put there, then the destruction process takes place through UN lyric. Well, now we are a bit handicapped because of the closure of Anschluss Mitta, where we would not be able to smelt all the firearms that are taken in for border survey or lodged for destruction or malfunction. So now we have to find other avenues. We can't dump them anymore in the sea, or friends of the sea, fishermen and friends and fishermen of the sea would take us to task. So we now have to find ways and means to now dispose of these defective and malfunctioning firearms.
Thank you. Just for the record, Mr. Acting Commissioner, and back to the point about private security firms, is this a major concern of yours as Commissioner of Police, the operation of some of these security firms in terms of maintaining best practice as, I guess, an informal part of law enforcement?
Well, it is a major concern of mine with the growing number of private security firms, and it places a challenge in relation to whether they are all in a position to provide the kind of quality that is necessary in the country in the context of security. But the Commissioner of Police is not responsible for approving private security firms. It is the responsibility of the Minister of National Security.
The advice of someone.
Well, it's a whole process, not on the advice of someone, on the advice of many, including the Commissioner of Police.
Thank you. There are two issues that I do not think were fully elucidated. One of them is, well, the issue of arms and ammunition that are kept in the possession of the TTPS at the various stations. Now, you would have in your possessions weapons seized from dead FUL holders. You'd also have weapons seized from live FUL holders who would have given them to you for safekeeping, and you'd have weapons that would be seized from various offenses. Is there an extent then of weapons having been lost or missing from the possession of the police service? What has been the incidence of that?
Well, there have been incidents, and it has been in the public domain of incidents of firearms being lost in the custody of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. But the frequency of those incidents are low. So I would confirm, yes, there have been incidents, and those incidents are generally public knowledge. How low exactly is low? Have there been any, well, how many incidents within the last 12 months or so? Just trying to get an indication of the severity of this issue. Well, I will have to check our system, because each one will, in fact, effectively be recorded on our database. So I'll have to check the number. So I would be irresponsible to tell you one or two, and then it is 3 or 4. So I can check it, verify it, and provide the committee with the information.
Let me relate to you. Let me relate to you. Commissioner is making a note.
Yes, I just noted the last issue of what I have to supply.
We appreciate
that. There
that.
can be some...
I can assure you we keep a copious record.
Yes.
And we would assist you.
I know, Chairman.
Yes. Commissioner, let me share this with you, and I do so, and let's tell you in advance that you have to implore, you have to find a way to communicate to every single officer under your charge the importance of confidentiality. It relates directly to public confidence. This is not to criticize, but really just to highlight to you publicly an experience of a citizen, no ordinary citizen, an outstanding citizen and contributor to this land, told me that one day he was at his home and his doorbell rang, and he answered to find 2 men at his gate. And this was probably about 10 years ago, I'm telling you. When he inquired as to their purpose, one of them pointed out to him that he had lodged his firearm at a certain police station, and it was there for a considerable period, and the individual at the gate had come to find out with a proper description of it whether he was willing to sell it. and the person doing that was not a police officer, you can imagine how discomforting and disconcerting that experience would have been. So as we speak here about firearms, that came to my mind in all of this, the register, the record, because with those things, a lot could be done. Every single police officer under your charge must understand that the law, good practice, dignity, public safety largely turns on their confidentiality. That impacts directly on public confidence. Is it likely that that sort of thing can happen today? I just related to you a matter 10 years old or thereabout.
But what I can share with you, I do hope that there is no repeat of such a situation. However, the police service is still challenged with the quality of officers in the organization. We are working hard at cleansing the organization, seeking to ensure that we get the right people in. And we continue to effectively communicate with the officers on an ongoing basis. I was rushing from South, where we had a rollout meeting to deal with our operating plan 2017 in Princestown with the Southern Division. I left there to come here. And at that meeting, I had 2 presentations which I made this morning to the officers. And inside that had to do with reminding them of being those true professionals that we expect of them. But that is part of what we do on a consistent basis. Where there are shortcomings and officers have dropped short, we are seeking ways and means of ensuring that we find the mechanism to impose the level of discipline, even to the ultimate point of dismissal as relates to those officers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get back into the topic of ballistic testing, which the chairman had raised earlier, and really for clarification of the public in as simple terms as possible, and this question is probably for the Forensic Science Center, could you explain to us what is involved in ballistic testing of a firearm, exactly how, you know, the bullet might be matched to the gun, and based on your answer, this would lead into other questions that I have in regards to ballistic testing.
All right. Once ammunition is discharged through a firearm, is charged in a firearm, unique markings or impressions are in fact left on the ammunition. And these unique markings would have originated from the firearm and is unlikely to be the same from 2 firearms. So what ballistics really looks at is, on firearm projectiles, you're looking at the study of what happens to the projectile while it's in the firearm, which we call internal ballistics or interior ballistics. What happens while it's going through during the projectile while it's being right, and when it leaves the barrel, and then what we call that's exterior ballistics, and then we have terminal ballistics when it actually hits the whatever, eventually, be it a wound or terminal ballistics. That's what's called terminal ballistics. So when we are looking at what we call spent ammunition, which has been discharged in a weapon, what we're looking at are really for these unique markings, which are unique from the firearm. So that really is what forensic ballistics means. We are looking at these unique markings to determine if it came from a particular firearm, or in the absence of a particular firearm, if we have 2 shooting incidents, if the same firearm was used. Because we don't always have the firearm, but we are sometimes able to link incidents because we have 2 sets of, we have spent shells from 2 different or 3 or 4 different incidents, but the markings are the same. So what the firearm examiners at the center do is they would actually examine the bullets and the spent cartridge cases to determine, one, if they would have come, from one firearm. If it's one incident, you can have several firearms at one incident, group them, and in some instances, if we don't have the firearm, but we could check to see if it was from another incident, or if we in fact have a firearm, we will then do a test fire, and that is what they will be looking at to determine these unique markings, whether or not the same firearm was used.
And I would thank you very much for that explanation, and there's a reason I asked for that, because I wanted the public to understand the science behind ballistic testing, and it's almost like fingerprints in terms of matching ammunition to a particular gun. So the next question that I want to ask is that from 2014 to 2016, the Commissioner of Police would have indicated a seizure of a number of firearms over that period. In those seizures, have you been able to match any of those firearms to any of the murders by firearms that have occurred over the same time period? With the ballistic testing that we have available to us, it should stand to reason that you should be able to match maybe one or two. I'm not saying that you would match many, but you may be able to match over the time period some murder in Trinidad and Tobago by firearm to the guns that you've been seizing. Is that a trend that you've been seeing?
You probably heard the the acronym IBIS. IBIS is an integrated ballistics identification system, which is at the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center. And what happens with IBIS is IBIS actually digitally captures the ballistic information of spent ammunition, and it could be spent ammunition from a shooting incident, of a test fire from a seized weapon, and that is stored in the database. So as long as we enter new information, there's an automatic, if you want to say, comparison with existing data in the database, and you get a ranking of this new piece of evidence, if you want to say, in the system with existing evidence. The IBIS technician will then look at the ranking, and do some more work to determine whether what we will call, if it's a possible match with existing data, because it's all automatic. And the advantage of the IBIS system is that it allows us, or IBIS rather, it allows us to be able to look at images and ballistic information of data that would have entered since we started the system in 2004. And once the ranking shows that there is a possible match, what we then do is we actually get the physical evidence, right? And the firearm examiner then takes that the two pieces of physical evidence, and then they will actually examine it for the particular unique markings that we described using a comparison microscope. So in terms of the IBIS system, which we've been using since 2004, we have all illegal firearms that have been submitted to us from FUL holders. We have over 20,000 data from over 20,000 weapons. I can give you the information with the breakdown, how many firearm users licensed, how many police weapons, etc., at a later time. So we have all that information, and then we also have from the crime pieces of evidence that would have been recovered from scenes that would have been submitted to us by police, and we also have from the weapons that would have been seized, where we would have taken the test fires and put them into the system. Sure.
The unique markings that ballistic testing would reveal, you said, would be shown on the projectile that makes its way out of the weapon to the target. You also have unique markings caused by the impact of that projectile on the target. Do you get unique markings on the casing or the empty shell as well? Well, I'm happy to know that, because I might tell you, scientific and professional as you are, I would learn recently that in the illegal fraternity for firearms, revolvers sell at a higher price than the more modern pistol, because it is believed that no shell is ejected from the revolver. The 6 remain in there and can be disposed of as we see fit, as opposed to a pistol where the shell is ejected as the next one is recoiled for discharge. So as a result of that belief that if we retain the shells, there'll be no unique markings or ballistic achievement. You with me? The revolver sells on the illegal market for more than the pistol. So now what you have done by indicating that you get unique markings on all, I think it has interfered with the market somewhat. But let me ask, in the United Kingdom, for an example, they have what is known as the National Ballistic Intelligence Service. They have a separate unit that deals with the matters that you have just discussed as a daily stock, dedicated stock. The commissioner in his contributions a while ago suggested that that matter is left to you. He does not have a register of the ballistic findings on firearms. Is that correct? You hold such a register.
Not really a register, because it's a system. It's an it's a system. So what happens is it's kept within the system, and the searches are done automatically.
All right.
But
yes,
all the information, all the if you want to say the items of evidence,
the data
or would match back either to a weapon that is from FUL holder, from TTPS firearm, or or anything like that.
Defense Force, Customs,
as well as the evidence from crime scenes and or seized weapons, which would have been submitted to us by the TTPS. Right. So it's in other words, when we get, if we want, well, I was going to continue on saying, based on Mr. Freitas's answer, question is that we've had 847 confirmed hits or interconnected linkages of what would have been probably unknown shooting incidents that were linked based on the IBIS. But these would have been done once we got the rankings and so on. The confirmed hits would then be confirmed by a firearm examiner, actually using a comparison microscope. So
this 847, it's since you started, or?
Yes, since we started.
Okay.
So these, in addition to which, sometimes the police would be aware that they would have their intelligence telling them this firearm or this shooting incident is related to, it's in the same area around the same time. So then they would pointedly ask us to compare the evidence from these 2 or 3 or 4 cases, right? But these would be confirmed hits which would not have been otherwise picked up unless, if we did not have the IBIS system.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually get this particular answer out because I want to know in relation to seizures, which is the guns that you're taking off of the street, if they've had hits to incidents that have occurred, which I guess would be helping the detection rate at that point. So you're doing something which is taking guns off of the street, but because you've done the ballistic testing on that gun that you've seized, you are now able to match it to a particular crime. How many of those incidences have occurred in relation to the number of guns that you've seized?
I won't be able to give you that information offhand, so we'll probably furnish it to the committee at a later date.
If I may offer a suggestion for the Commissioner of Police, as an aid in estimating the number of illegal guns out there that you're unaware of, any weapon, any ammunition which comes in, which goes through the IBIS system and there is not a match, that will indicate that it isn't a weapon which you would have come into contact to. So that can be used as an aid in helping you estimate how many illegal weapons there are out there. That's the suggestion.
Thank you very much.
And relatedly, Mr. Chairman, if I could, in terms of the numbers of illegal weapons, the acting commissioner has outlined from 2014 through 2016 earlier, and to Ms. Lewis, is it that the IBIS system through the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Sciences Center is shared data with international agencies?
Right now, we have a standalone system. However, we have recently written a draft cabinet note asking that our data be shared on IBIN, which is the Interpol Ballistics Identification Network, which I think has, 32 countries with IBIS that currently have share their information through Interpol. And we were really concerned because Barbados, Jamaica, and Belize, within the Caribbean, they are on IBIN. So with us now being able to share and do searches on IBIN, we will be able to, get intelligence as to whether there are any weapons which are actually moving through the Caribbean, at least among those other countries. And so that is it. That is where we're at now, asking to join IBIN. And cabinet note was recently submitted to the ministry for
I'm presuming that will be a very important tool in your arsenal.
Yes, and it will also help the TTPS as well as the other regional law enforcement agencies if we notice any trends.
Thank you.
One quick question before I recognize Senator Cochran. You started this system in 2004.
Yes.
You have a backlog of items, firearms, spent ammunition, spent shells, and what have you. External, I can't remember what you call it, but when it makes impact with the target. Do you have some items of evidence produced by the police service and other agencies in backlog not yet on the system? How current are you, in other words? On a day-to-day basis, you are current?
No, Chairman, what happens is as part of the actual examination of firearms evidence, IBIS is putting the evidence is part of the actual procedure. It's one of the steps. So any cases that would have been completed, any firearms cases that would have been completed, that would actually be on IBIS. However, right now we have a fairly huge backlog of firearm cases that have not been worked on, that have not even been opened, so those would not yet be on the system. So we do have quite a few cases, going back to a couple of years, that have not been, that are not yet on the system, because it's put on the system as we work on the cases.
Is that necessary?
To a certain extent, for, if you want to say for chain of custody purposes, yes, it's good laboratory practice, because you don't want to open the evidence, just put it on IBIS, and it's all, even before it's put on IBIS, there are certain preliminary procedures that are in fact
required.
Yes. So you don't want to just take it and put it on IBIS and leave it open there until somebody actually works
But on the
it.
other hand, we've heard 1,000 times from various quarters that certificates of analysis in narcotics cases, and even in firearm cases, can take 2 and 3 years to return from the Forensic Science Center. I would hate to think I hope not. And the reason why I ask the question is because I'm praying that it is not the case that the same thing happens for not so good reasons in relation to ballistics and entry into IBIS. I hope that any delay is for very, very, very good reason, because we need to be current. What is your reaction to that?
Well, your fears are very, they're very, present, right? As I said, we do have, we have been able, it's not part of this discussion, but we've been able to really clear up the backlog with the narcotics, but we have not been able to clear up the backlog with the firearms. However, what we have been doing is once there, if we want to call them active cases before the court, where there is in fact a defendant, those cases are given priority, as well as any cases requested by the TTPS. We work on cases based on priority for investigative purposes by the TTPS. But yes, it is in fact that we do have a lot of cases, pieces of evidence to be worked on that are not yet on the system, and some of them are quite a few years old. In terms of the legal firearms, we are much more up to date with those. We have, based on the recent purchase or acquisition of firearms by the TTPS, we have a few outstanding still to put in the system, but we are doing those. But again, casework, from the criminal cases, those are in fact given priority. So once we don't have any of the regular casework where we're trying to assist the police with their investigators, then we put on the others. But we will put on, so we have a small backlog for the legal firearms, but those are done, those are more up to date in terms of the...
Madam Director, a gun incident takes place this evening. The police visit the scene, the crime scene investigators do their thing, and they find a projectile and 9 shells. A projectile lodged in a wall and 9 shells, casings, okay? The CSIs take these and the process is undergone. Is it not the case that you will have reasonably quick access to these pieces to assist the police in their inquiry, in investigation? Because if you have this information quickly, you might be able to assist the investigator in solving the crime. Because you might be able to tell the investigator, that has come from one of those that we have on the database here. You need to go and see Mrs. So-and-so. She looks like she can explain how that firearm was used. And I said Mrs. deliberately.
Yes, once there's a process where it will be taken up by the scenes of crime officers. It actually sometimes also has to go to the specialist evidence recovery unit, and then it will be then submitted to us. But the reality is, Chairman, that we are not able to work on the things as a timely basis as we would like to. But once there is a request for us to do, to treat it with a priority, we do it, because we have been, we have been overwhelmed in terms of the numbers of, or rather the quantity of firearm evidence we have at the center to examine.
All that means to me is that you need more staff.
Right.
You need more resources to deal with that.
Yes.
And I would expect that you will take action, Madam Director, to get more resources, because we need to be current.
Yes, Chairman, and we had some recent promotions and ensuing vacancies, and Service Commissions Department, they have advertised, and we are hoping the advertisements closed last Friday, so we are hoping that within the next 2 to 3 months, we will be able to get some more staff.
Let me ask a question. I am aware that in some countries, it is not only the state that does that kind of analysis. There are privately run institutions that can do that kind of analysis. And law enforcement agencies can make use of their service and get responses in a very timely manner. Is it that capacity, as far as you are aware, is only within the domain of the state in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, Chairman, I am not familiar with that being
Ballistics.
ballistics. I'm not aware of ballistics really being done by private entities in other areas. It's usually by a state agency. In the States, it's ATF or the actual state law enforcement
In particular,
agencies.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
if I may.
yeah.
I've been holding back from certain contributions because as a member of the executive sitting on this committee, sometimes there's information in the executive's hand. What I can say is that the very subject matter of a lot of what we're seeing is under direct information control at the Ministry of National Security and at the Attorney General's office. And perhaps the secretary of the committee may wish to write to the permanent secretaries of those two entities to amplify what is actually going on, because there are discussions afoot with international partners,
Yes.
the UK, etc., on the very lines of support that the committee is now inquiring. But I don't want to be improper as a member of this committee and volunteer, as we would say in court, advice from the bar table.
Yes.
So perhaps the Ministry of National Security and the AG's office can be called upon for further information.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks a lot, AG. The point I was getting to, for example, like narcotics, there are private institutions that can determine whether that is a narcotic, whether that is marijuana or cocaine or so. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
and
correct.
that capacity exists in Trinidad and Tobago outside of the state?
I am not aware. But it can be, I know that happens in foreign jurisdictions, particularly for narcotics, and well as for DNA.
Yeah,
and document examination.
And I'm also aware, and this brings me to the relationship between the police. I would like you to tell us about the relationship between the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Forensic Science Center, how the thing works to ensure that we get the best in crime detection and prevention. But before that, I think it is now the case, Mr. Brebner, you might be able to tell me, the police armorer is yet again giving evidence in respect of, I'm asking, is it the case that the police armorer is now able to go to the court and give evidence that this thing is ammunition and or a firearm?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that classification of exhibit has returned to the police service on February 4, 2013. That returned to...
There was a hiatus, it had stopped?
Yes, because of certain circumstances, it stopped in 2000, I believe, sir.
So I suspect that the police now being able, Madam Director, to go to court to give evidence in that this thing is ammunition or this thing is a firearm in accordance with the law as was described by the Commissioner, that is of some value to you. It assists you.
Yes, it has resulted in a reduction in the number of cases that are submitted to us, and we are getting strictly now the ballistics cases where you're looking for comparison that requires the expertise of a firearms examiner.
Great. So that has been an advance, a help.
That has been a help, and as I said, the backlog had started from since about 2000, all the way.
Yes.
But now we are getting fewer cases, but we still have some of those older cases to address. So we address them, as I said, based on the requests of the TTPS investigators, as well as what is actually before the court. In terms of the relationship, well, you had sort of preempted, Mr. Brebner, answer that in terms of your question, whereby the forensic ballistics examinations, if it's pure ballistics where you want to compare to determine fired ammunition came from a particular weapon or from the same weapon or so on, that is strictly done at the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center. In instances where you have seized weapons that would have the serial numbers might, are not present, would have been erased, those are also submitted to the center. And where we have seized weapons that are suspected to have been involved in a shooting incident, those would also be submitted to the center. The seized weapons and the ammunition, unfired ammunition, those would be taken to the armorer. However, the seized weapons, test fires, are collected and submitted to the Trinidad and Tobago Forensic Science Center to be put on IBIS. So we would have instances whereby it's a seized weapon and we would be able to link it to a particular incident.
And finally, from me, before I give you again, Mr. Director, it used to be prior to the hiatus, it used to be that only the official police armorer would have given such evidence. Is that still the case, or you have 3 or 4 other persons in the armorer shop who can do so in various courts on a given day? Or is it that the law still confines it to the police armorer so designated?
Unfortunately for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, that we have had an additional 7 persons, because the commissioner has the authority to appoint armorers, right? So we have additional six persons appointed, sorry, and but so in doing these things, we need a little bit of teething, but it's going to be in a position where the commissioner has made recommendations that we are looking for a faster turnover time and completion in matters. So we are, there is a hope, and we have in fact.
So these 6 officers are not yet up and running. It is now happening. They're being prepared.
It's now it's in progress.
Let me, on behalf of this committee, take this opportunity to highly commend the Commissioner of Police for that initiative. We live in a time when we are being seriously threatened by those who perpetrate criminal activity with the use of firearms. And this idea of reinstating the police armorer and his team to give evidence to deal with them is critical and beautiful and valuable. And to have learned now that the commissioner has designated 6 other officers in addition to the official armorer, and they are being prepared for this purpose, is really commendable indeed. Mr. Commissioner, we want to say it's a development in great foresight.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick addition. A statement and then a final question. It's interesting that Mr. Chairman commended the Police Commissioner. I also want to commend Madam Director. It's not often that I'm comforted by someone's ability to articulate clearly their remit and give the public a sense of what they are doing in the interest of national security. I think you've done a really good job of that today. The question is, with that said, and this is not to take away from the contributions of any of the other panel members who've also done very well. In addition to resources, given the ever-evolving criminality in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world, what are some of your other challenges, security issues, sensitivities aside? Is it that you're able to update your training, your technologies to meet your workload in more efficient ways? What are some of your challenges?
The main challenge for us really now at the TTFSC is manpower as well as accommodation, because the number of submissions that we've had over the years, we have increased manpower. In most areas, we have been able to, get the new technologies in, but the new technologies require space, right? And we also, because of the increase in the criminal activities, particularly in homicides and firearm-related crime, we've found ourselves not being able, although we've had increases in manpower, to be able to effectively, so we use a mixed manpower as well as technology, but we have now, our accommodation is now very limited, but the ministry is looking into that, actively looking into that, so we're hoping to get some, good news on that soon.
Have you had discussions with any of the tertiary level institutions in terms of career opportunities and streamlining graduates in this, obviously?
Prior to 2012, I think it was 2012, most of the postgraduate training which is required for the disciplines at the center, the forensic disciplines, we had to get it at international universities. However, since 2012, UWI-MONA has introduced MSc in forensic science, emphasis on DNA, toxicology, chemistry. And so we are getting a lot of local and regional persons who are trained. And so, we no longer require, it doesn't cost very much, and I think they will gate, it's a gate program. So we have quite a few graduates who are able to, respond to when we have advertisements. Unfortunately, firearms or training of a firearm examiner has not really been, it's not one of the disciplines where you can go and get just go to university and get a degree, because firearms training, a lot of it is internships in agencies with experienced persons, because the average university is not going to have a cadre of firearms, a cadre of casework where they can just train people on. So that is a little limited for us in terms of getting, but within the last 2 to 3 years, we've been able to get some training for our examiners through the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And right now, the country Trinidad and Tobago is actually benefiting from a UN LREC regional assistance package that started in 2015. What year are we? No, 2016. When it started, 2016, right? Yes. And we've also benefited from some training for our firearm examiners through those programs.
To the Commissioner of Police, or anyone who can assist, how routine do you check suspects for gunshot residue at the crime scene investigation level?
Once a suspect is detained with any suspicion around a discharge of a firearm, he's swabbed. So that is as of course. So we're dealing with suspects, and we know for a fact not every crime scene you would have suspects, but once we have a suspect involved in any discharge of a firearm, he's swabbed. So it is as of course.
And how many of these checks have led to positive matches?
But I'll have to verify that in order to answer.
To the Forensic Sciences Center, sorry. There are about 2 or 3 elements as it relates to GSR, which is gunshot residue testing. Have you purchased any equipment to increase the specificity of the analysis?
No, we haven't.
And why?
Space constraints.
Space constraints?
Yes, because the instrumentation for that tends to be, requiring, if you're talking about SEM and those, we actually have something at the moment, the atomic absorption, but we haven't bought anything more recently in terms for actually doing GSR.
Because there is
Again, sorry to interrupt, but what the delegates this afternoon have not told you is that for many years, the physical construction has not been attended to. And as a result of that, they are housed in a containerized area and then a physical area in very inappropriate accommodation situation. Again, forgive me for giving this information from this end of the table, but if it wasn't asked, I must put it on. So this specific policy should be requested of the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of National Security, who will inform that there is a very comprehensive plan to better accommodate the Forensics Division and also to deal with its staffing ratios, because it's a very critical part in the criminal justice cycle.
And finally, to the Commissioner of Police, do you think that a gun amnesty will assist in any way in our fight against illegal firearms?
Just to be as frank, straightforward, and up with the mark, a country which is seizing 765 firearms, there is not an issue around gun amnesty. And if we look at the history of gun amnesty globally, the research have shown that gun amnesty have not necessarily brought the results that people perceive it can bring. Extensive research would have been done through the US, and it has shown that gun amnesty have not effectively worked. But I'm saying gun amnesty is to try to get guns in. Trinidad and Tobago, you are seizing 765 firearms. That's more than Jamaica and any other country in the region. What we require is the stoppage of the inflow of weapons and not necessarily gun amnesty.
To stay with us until perhaps about 9 p.m. But notwithstanding that fact, time has run. I think we have covered a tremendous amount of space and matters today, so I would like to ask the members of this committee, starting on my left, whether we have any question or closing comment that we would like to go around to as we approach a close at 5 p.m.
Well, Commissioner of Police, there is one final question that I'm sure the viewing public would have been very interested in getting some further information on. In response to one of the earlier questions, Mr. Coffey would have indicated, well, the process in which you get a FUL, and you would have also indicated that, well, basically the last step in obtaining a FUL lies with the Commissioner of Police. So after all investigation is done, you would make the determination on whether someone is granted an FUL. You indicated that the process can take up to a year. There are thousands of applications, and there are many applications that are given priority status, as opposed to individuals applying for an FUL. What wasn't clarified is, well, one, I know it's in the law, but many persons may not be aware, the criteria for an ordinary civilian to apply for an FUL, and secondly, more importantly, what would you look at in determining whether you would grant one? I'm sure members of the public would be happy to understand that.
Well, I could answer in short if the chairman permits me.
Please.
I rely heavily on the outcome of the investigation that is done. I do not sit at my office and make that determination other than guided effectively by the investigation. So an extensive investigation is done, and the recommendation is made for the grant or not to grant, and I look at the content of the investigation in order to make that determination.
Member De Freitas, any closing question or comment?
I don't have a closing question per se, but just a comment. And I just wish to thank each and every one of you for coming. Crime is a major issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and as I join with Senator Richards and the rest of my colleagues in saying that today's inquiry would have provided some modicum of comfort in regards to ballistic testing of firearms and dealing with that issue of firearms in the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. So again, I just want to thank you guys for coming and working along with us in terms of our inquiry. Thanks again.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I want to add my commendations and thank you for your forthrightness. And just to ask again, I think Mr. Ford promised some sort of analysis on the possibility of the origins of some of the illegal guns. Thank you again.
Senator Arawi, my colleague, sorry. Remember, we started out in that place, so I had grown accustomed to saying senator. Now he's the member of parliament for San Fernando West.
It's been an exercise of restraint to sit here knowing very well how much you each do. And my only suggestion would be to please continue fighting the very hard fight that you're fighting, but speak up as well a little bit more in your communication with the public, because the public understandably wants to know a lot more. And I do know quite a lot of what's going on, and I commend you publicly and openly for the work that's going on. I think that we're making some systemic changes that have not been addressed for a very, very, very long time. And from that point of view, I certainly feel very hopeful that we can work on this issue and grapple it together. So thank you very much.
I have a final question. I know persons are winding down, so the mood is quite mellow now. So I just wanted to find out one last question, and with your leave, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. You said in your response in question 21, that is the response of February the 10th, that 5 police officers were held responsible for instances of loss or missing firearms. You said that you used the word held responsible. It suggests that they were found guilty of some sort of offense. Could you tell me, if possible, if the investigation is concluded and sanction has already been pronounced, what has been the fate of these 5 police officers? If you're permitted to see, obviously.
I would just clear up that, because I think the answer doesn't truly reflect an issue of completion. It has an effect of completion of investigation relating to them, but not the completion of matters relating to them. So I can just clear it up to share whether any of them at this point in time would have reached the point of facing a conviction, or that those matters are pending. So I'll just clear up that for the committee.
Any closing comments as we part company this evening or afternoon?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am very pleased, and I'm sure the members of staff who are here with me, that we were able to assist you and to actually clarify some concerns to both yourself and the public as to what is actually done in terms of forensic ballistics. Yes, what everybody really sees and knows out there is CSI, but in reality we do it, but it doesn't, it takes a lot longer, and we do have our constraints. We work within our constraints, but at the end of the day, we really try to work based on what our clients, which our main client being the TTPS, what they ask us to do, we prioritize based on them as well as on the courts. And we will continue to do as much as we can with what we have to provide the service, not only in ballistics, but in all the areas of forensic science and pathology that we actually provide at the center. So thank you for the opportunity, and we welcomed it, and thank you very much for hosting us.
Chairman and members of the committee, I just want to thank you all for facilitating us at this Joint Select Committee session. Just to emphasize that dealing with firearms is a priority for the police service. Firearms have been used in close to 80% of the murders in Trinidad and Tobago, and murders have been of the greatest concern to all the citizens of this land. And in 2017, we have set ourselves clear goals, and we have set ourselves some outcomes that we are seeking out at the end of 2017. Critical for us is about dealing with firearms in an improved way, and we are at this point in time again revisiting our processes so that we can have even more timely impact on the issue of the outcome of our dealing with firearms. So in simple language, we are seeking to ensure that we bring closure by way of outcome, whether it's by way of convictions and otherwise in the courts, for persons who are involved in the use of firearms in Trinidad and Tobago within the shortest period of time. And that's our mission in 2017.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. Well, on behalf of the committee, we thank you for coming as well. I think I say on behalf of the committee, we are satisfied based on the discourse today that Trinidad and Tobago has the capacity to deal from a scientific standpoint with the troubles around firearms and their illegal possession and use. We are satisfied based on what we heard. We call upon you, though, to exert greater efforts, harder work, more dedicated and committed work, because the resources obviously are largely there. The techniques, the capacity, the law is in place. I personally, and I'm sure this committee is not happy to have learned about the backlog and the reasons offered for that in respect of the ballistic testing. And therefore, if it is that you consider that more personnel, more resources is necessary, it is your duty to say so to the administration in the Ministry of National Security. And I'm sure, all things considered, efforts will be exerted to provide the greater resources that is necessary to deal with this avalanche that the society is experiencing in the world of crime, particularly with the use of firearms. I'm looking forward, Mr. Commissioner, Madam Director, to your recommendations for improvements or amendments to the law, because we discovered today that there are one or two little areas where improvement in the law might be of some value. That is not within your domain. It is in the domain of the lawmakers. But it must come from you as operators of the Firearms Act and the forensic science law and what have you, and we look forward to those with the greatest anticipation. Commissioner, to you I say, I listened to a discourse over the last few days, or yes, last few hours, where you were, and I use the word accused decidedly, of giving up, throwing your hands up. From what I heard today, and from what I heard of your discourse, the little bits I heard on the radio, and your response, I'm satisfied that you are not giving up. I'm very encouraged by your work. Things are not all well, things are not all perfect. Your men and women are not as productive as they might be. However, I think you stand innocent of having given up, and I don't agree with those who said from your words that you suggested that, just for what little that was worth. So keep up the good work, and we look forward to your responses to the things we asked and those that you promised to give us in writing with the greatest urgency, because they will help us to determine our next steps from this committee as it relates to what you do and what we looked at today, and it will also assist us in reporting to the larger Parliament when the occasion for that arises. So on behalf of the committee, on behalf of the Parliament, we thank you for coming and wish you safe passage back to your respective desks, because we know you will go there and continue the hard work, notwithstanding that it is 5:12 p.m. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all. Thank you very much. This meeting is now at an end. Suspended. Thank you.